So we have seen here different steps that are involved in a machine learning problem, or you can say this is a pipeline which involves these major steps, which is used in most of the machine learning applications to solve different problems. So it involves data gathering, data pre-processing, feature engineering, algorithm selection and training, and then we can make decisions on or predictions on the basis of this. Now, let's have a look at the learning model of a machine learning based model. So, initially, we have some input data set, or we can say that we have some input samples, and we provide these samples or the training data set to the system, right? So our system basically uses a learning method, and on the basis of that the learning method, it basically performs its training, right? And once the system completes its training, then we can provide some kind of testing data to the trained system or model, and then we can see that how good our algorithm performs on the test data. So initially, our data set is basically divided into two data sets. One is the training data set, and the other is the testing data set. So we can say that after data acquisition, we are dividing our data set into two further sets or two subsets. One is the training set, which contains maybe 70 to 80% of the total data set, and it will contain all types of data set, so that our algorithm can see that what kind of data is present. On the other hand, we have some testing data set, which also comes from the initial whole data set, and we are basically dividing the testing set over a ratio of maybe 20% or 30%, right? And this testing data set is basically being used to test the system, that how good we have trained our model or system. So the training is the process of making the system able to learn, right? So the target is to make the system capable to learn some useful features from the input data set, right? So this procedure is basically termed as a training, and we know that we don't have any free lunch rule, right? So the training set and testing set come from the same distribution, so the initial distribution is the same, and we are basically dividing that distribution over a ratio of maybe 80-20 ratio, right? Or maybe sometimes 70-30 ratio, right? So if this distribution basically depends on the problem or the application which you are trying to solve. Now, in the next two slides, you will see the whole pipeline or workflow in a supervised learning domain, as well as the unsupervised learning domain, right? So, in supervised learning domain, we have a training data set, which can consist of a variety of formats. It can include images, it can include videos, or maybe some audio data, and we basically extract some features out of this data, right? So as you remember that in supervised learning we also have the labels associated to the data set, so we are providing our machine learning algorithm not only the features extracted from the input data set, but we are also providing it the labels of, of each data, right? And our machine learning algorithm is basically being trained on these features and on these labels, so that it can know that what kind of features the initial distribution have, and what are the labels being associated with that. And once we have a trained model here, then we can use that trained model for some kind of predictions, right? So we call it as a predictive model. So what we do is in the testing phase, we have a test sample here, right? So it is, so if it's a data set of images, then we can select a single image as a test image. We extract features from that image, and then we try to predict the outcome of that input samples based on that trained model, right? And its outcome will be an expected label, right? So it will basically generate the label of an unknown entity here. In an unsupervised learning problem, you will see that the major portion or the major pipeline is the same. We are doing the same thing, but the major difference is that we don't have any associated labels here, right? So in this case, our model is basically trying to uh, form different clusters or different groups based on the underlying representation of the input data set, which is being fed to the model in the form of layers, right? So the basic difference between supervised learning and unsupervised learning is the presence of labels, but most of the other components will remain the same. Now let's talk a little bit about the data gathering process. So it might depend on the human work, because if we are dealing in the supervised learning domain, then we have to do the labeling of the data manually, right? So if you are lucky enough to find some sort of labeled data already in some open source repository, for example the ImageNet repository, then it is, you are fortunate enough to use that. But if your application resides where no label data is available, then maybe you need to do the labeling of the data set manually, and it requires the domain knowledge as well, and maybe you will also require some human experts in order to label the data, because if that data set belongs to some medical images, then you might require some medical images, medical experts in order to label that data. Okay, so and another important thing is that the more data you have, the more better result will be, right? Because some algorithms need large amounts of data to be useful. For example, neural networks. Because in neural networks, when you have an algorithm related to maybe from the domain of deep learning, then your network can be too complex, consisting of a number of layers. In that case, you need to provide quite a handful amount of data in order to train your network, right? So the better result can only be achieved if we have large amounts of data available related to our problem domain. The quantity and quality of data dictate the model accuracy. Now there are two things that highly affect the accuracy of the model, right? Number one thing is that how much data we have, how much quantity of the data we have, and how much good quality data we have, right? So good quality data means that there should not be redundant or inconsistent values in the data. Or if you are talking about images or videos, then in that case we should not have blurred or noisy images or videos, right? So if we have an handsome amount of data and that of good quality, then we can expect that our model will give us a good accuracy rate.